This season gives us the opportunity to have a more in-depth lesson with some of our favorite designers. Hi, I'm Katie Hacker, and with me is author and artist Mary Hettmansperger. We always run out of time when Mary's on the show, so we're excited to spend the whole episode with her hammering, torching, and coloring metal. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you, thank you. Well, we're gonna try some different things this time. We're gonna use colored pencils, which is really an odd thing. You wouldn't think metal and colored pencils would go together, but actually it's kind of fun. And there's some artists out there doing some magnificent work with this, but this is just sort of a little short tutorial on how to do it. And basically I start out with 24 gauge copper wire or copper sheeting, and I just use my scissors, I cut a shape, and then I take this to the torch. And basically, I just use a propane torch. This is a real nice one because it's self-igniting. So I use this, I put this in the pliers, heat it up, and anneal it. And I'm not really interested at all about what I get. I wanted just a real roughed up surface. And what I'm doing is I'm creating dirt, and I'm making basically a surface that is kind of compromised.
So it's toothier for the color?
It's very much toothier.
Right.
So the problem is if I try to do this process on this, you really run the risk of it not sticking or staying real well. So once I get my pieces, I've already torched these, then you want to come up with color. Now, one thing I always do with all my metal work is once I've cut it, then I want to come in and I like to pull my edges. And I actually, it looks like it's kind of deckled. So I pull it like this first. And then I can texture it. And you can use anything from the ball part of the ball peen hammer. You can do any kind of texturing hammers, which is really nice. So I'll do that on this one.
When you do your edges, is that for decorative effect, or is that to...
Well, it also smooths them out.
Okay.
So it does a little bit of both. One thing after I get all the edges done is I like to use steel wool. What happens with steel wool, it's actually nicer than a file because it takes off the rough edge, but it makes it nice and smooth at the same time. So you can really feel the difference here. Okay. The other thing you can do is you can go back in with the steel wool after you've created your pieces, and it kind of takes off some of the surface, which is really nice and creates a real interesting edge. So once you do this, then you want to take and use a gesso and to paint the surface. Now, really any gesso is going to work. I would suggest trying different ones that you might find that you like. My preference is one that's a little thicker. Some of the thinner gessos have a tendency not to be as to cover as well.
And is that just to provide a receptive surface again for that color?
It is. It is. So you're going to come in and paint. And what you want to make sure you do is get it all covered, and it may take 2 coats.
Can you use acrylic paint for that?
I like the gesso. I like the gesso better. Okay. It has a little bit more tooth to it. It's a little thicker. So I'm going to come in and paint it. And the other thing you do, if you have brush strokes, you're going to see them. So you have to be real careful about that. Now, once you get this done, I'm going to put my brush over here.
And do you always want it to be black?
Well, you can use white.
It could be any color.
You can use the gray. I like the black because obviously I like the black. But also the other thing you can do is you can use a little a mug warmer, and you can put it there and let it dry. Also, the heat warmer will come in handy here in a minute, and we'll talk about that. So now let's pretend with the magic of television we've got this. So I've got now my piece that's already dried, and you want to come in and you want to make sure that you use Prismacolor pencils because they're much waxier colored pencil. And I'm going to just put this down here, and you want to come in and not scrape hard, but just come in gently and start the process of coloring it.
Yeah, you can really see the relief texture.
Yes, definitely. So that's kind of a fun thing. If you do it obviously really nice and smooth, you're not going to have any kind of texture. You're just going to have the color. But if you do a little bit of texturing, then you get this effect. So this is your first coat. Now you can conceivably stop right here. And if you choose to stop here, what you want to use is a final matte fixative on the top. I say matte because I like matte. But you can use a final glossy fixative, but I like the matte. So you could use a final matte fixative over the top, and you're done. Also, if you're going to do several layers, this is a really good example. I've done the black first, and this was a very smooth piece, and I'm working on shading on this one. So I put down my black gesso, then I put down the black Prismacolor, then I sprayed it with a workable matte fixative. You let it dry, then you go back in with like your white or your blue. Once you get each layer,
you let it dry again?
Yes, and you have to have that workable finish in between.
And that's why you need those waxy pencils.
Right, and the other thing is that's where this comes really in handy, because what you do if you have multiple layers, you really want to get it solid and heated almost back down so it creates a really nice firm surface. But I wanted to also point out that you can see actually the marks that I make with the pencil with this one, because it is so smooth. This one, you can see the brush strokes from the gesso. This was with the ball peen part of the hammer. And this one was with a texturing hammer here. So you ended up with those lines, which is really quite interesting. So you can definitely do a lot of shading. I also wanted to point out this one here where I just took and basically drew with one of the pencils and made lines, and the same thing on this one where I came in and did circles around it.
Yeah, those
so you
look
can
great.
really come up with some interesting things. So this process is taking the gesso, painting it on. I went ahead and put the matte fixative, the workable matte fixative on top. Then I came in with my embossing. I took a stamp, used my embossing ink, stamped it on, used the embossing powders, put that on the stamp area, and then heated that. Now you can heat it with just your regular heating gun here, embossing tool. And then once that's done, I spray it again with my workable matte fixative. Then I'm good to go with the color pencil. So I can come in here now and color in between my piece.
Oh yeah, so you're using the embossed part as the top layer, and your color actually sort of becomes a background color.
It does. It goes right back where it should, but this ends up, I can go right over the top of it, and it won't come off. It's really quite nice.
And then you'll need to fix this again.
And then I need to fix it. If this is my final coat, I hit it with a final matte fixative, and then it's completely, good to go. There's a good example of that one over here. If you can see that, I've got it layered. And that's one thing I always say when I'm using the embossing, is I have a tendency to make sure that that's going to be a little protected, because that embossing sometimes can be a little bit cranky, and
it's not the same as enameling.
It's definitely not the same as enameling. So all that being said, I can show you how now to do a few fun things with cold connections.
Okay.
Basically, if you're looking at ways to now connect this, so I've got this little piece here, and I could actually connect this to this and this. I want to point out one thing, and this is kind of a spoiler, a fooler here, is I did not use a saw to cut this out. I actually came in, I cut straight down, cut my triangle out, then I put my metal back together, held it as I hammered it. And so this creates a nice little opportunity for a cold connection. And what I'm going to use on this one is just a little brad. So I'm going to poke my hole here, and I've got it lined up for my second hole.
And you're just using your metal punch?
Just using a metal hole punch, yep. And occasionally you'll get metal out the back side of these. They're a little bit thick. And then a brad is no more than just a paper brad that you would get at the scrapbooking store. And you want to push that through, and then it opens up in the back, just like a paper brad does. The only thing is I like to fool people, make them look like I did some...
So this isn't actually joining your layers together, it's making the frame.
It is.
The layers of the frame.
So I can come in and hammer, and what's really nice about that is it looks like a rivet.
Right, it was easy too.
But this is the problem with that, is that on the back side, you've got those two 2 feet hanging out. So my rule with brads is I'll use them only if I can sandwich them in between something.
Okay.
So I want to make sure that that's going to, disappear. Now what I'd like to do with this one, and actually I don't even need this back piece, I'm just going to connect this to this, is I can show you how to do a traditional rivet or an eyelet here.
Okay.
So to do the eyelet first, we'll come in here, and I'll make a hole here. You want to make your first hole, that basically is your marker or your pattern for the next one. And then you want to come in the bottom, like so.
Yeah, so you create your own template there.
Yeah, and now you've got the little eyelet, and
And these are tiny.
These are very tiny. An eyelet is, a lot of people will call it a grommet. It's not. It's actually a kind of a tubular shape with a lip already started. So I've got that there. I want to use this little eyelet setter, and basically it has a little bitty piece of metal stuck out there. You put that inside the hole like that.
Yeah.
And then just gently hit it like that, open it up. And basically you end up with an eyelet, which is a really nice one. Yeah. The next one I'll show you is a traditional rivet. And I'm going to come up here on this side. I'm just going to do this right next to it. So again, I'm going to come in like this, make a hole. And again, sometimes I get metal in the back. Like this.
Yeah, it's nice. The hammered texture on the frame really shows up too. And then you don't have to worry about damaging it by hammering your rivets because it's already hammered. Right.
Well, I always like to do some sort of, I like it to have a look that it's been worked on any kind of metal. Even this is a really good example. I don't like to just use the plain metal.
All of these textures
yeah,
are here.
All these are textures. Now this is just a nice little vise. This is a 16 gauge piece of wire, and obviously it's way long, but I do this for a reason. I like it to be a little bit longer, partly because I want to be able to have, I'm here on the end of the table, but I can hold it a little bit easier. So I'm going to come in and hold this there, like so. Okay, so I'm going to tighten this down. Okay, now I'm going to use these. They're a very good flush cut that's going to cut flat as opposed to giving me a point.
Okay.
So I want it to be up about the distance of, you know, maybe like a credit card. Very small amount,
thin.
Very small amount. Now what I use is I just use the ball part of my ball peen hammer, and I'm going to actually let the weight of the hammer do all the work. So I want to come in and I just start to let it go like this. And then this is called a nail set, and this is a concave tool that's going to come over the top then and sort of contain whatever I've just spread out. So I make it round, I pull it out. I'm going to come in again, like that. And I've just created a nice little head on this. I'm going to come out like this, and then I'm going to take this, and I can decide whether I want to do it this way or the other, but I'm going to go ahead and go this way.
Okay.
So I have this, oops, I have completely an overkill of wire here, obviously, but the two real things to be aware of when you're doing a rivet, success-wise, is you want that hole to be very tight up against the wire, and you don't want much wire, and that's the hardest part. It's hard to, you know, you always cut a little high and then come back in.
And I'm sure it takes some practice to get the hang of how
it
how
does,
tall
and you
that
know,
is.
if you just practice, it's amazing how quick. You know, I've had students that have just really wanted to learn, and I say, just keep trying.
Well, and I noticed you have a technique for moving your hammer too. It's kind of a crosswise
you know,
motion.
you don't go in and really hammer. You, like I said, you just really let the weight of the hammer do it.
So you're really working on flaring out the edges.
You are, and then containing them. And then you can do this with any diameter of wire. The main thing is that hole just has to correspond. So you can make, I mean, ultra small, crazy little bitty ones. But what's nice is it when you use the nail set.
Let's put it right here so we can see. There we go.
Okay. When you use the nail set, what's really nice about it is it will kind of, you know, contain those edges too, so they don't flare out.
Right,
so that's
and
a really
gives it
nice,
that rounded surface too.
Yeah, it's a really nice effect. Now also keep in mind, like with your eyelets, they come in different lengths. So a lot of times you can put many layers of metal together, or you can put spacers. A lot of times I will use spacers, and those will sort of, you know, create a little bit more dimension in my pieces. So that's kind of fun. Also, when you're using a pin back, and I love this technique, I'll actually go in and I will use either the brads, and like I said, they can be used if they're sandwiched, or I will use, like on this one, I use the eyelets. So
That looks
either
great.
one. And it's a great kohl connection.
Right, and both of those look so finished on the back.
And they are.
A lot of times you expect that the back isn't going to be as finished.
Well, you know, they should be.
Details.
It's metal. Either you can solder it, or you can go in and just use these great kohl connections. So it really does work out quite well. But that's a good way to use those too. So if we have time, I can show you how to finish up a little necklace like this.
Okay, we just have to have a couple of minutes.
Okay, good. Well, let me show you what we're going to do on this. I've already got a hole poked here. I'm going to poke a hole here. And I will just use one of these other metal pieces like this. And I'm just going to connect these guys together. And this is one of my favorite necklaces that I do. I take about a 7-inch piece of wire. I just visually divide it into thirds and take 1/3 of it, and I spread on a little spacer and another one and another spacer.
And are the washers just to create that dimensionality?
It is. If you don't put those in, everything ends up kind of flat. So I'm going to put that in. Come to the back side. I'll throw this one on the back too.
Keeping that back as finished as the front, are you, Mary?
Exactly. And then I want to go out about between 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch, somewhere in there, and come in. And then you get the little.
Here, let's lay it here so we can see.
Okay. And then you want to come in like this. You have your two pieces that are overlapping. You want to come in and wrap the shorter piece around.
Okay.
And then once you get that done, all you have to do is make a wrap loop on the top.
Oh, perfect. Let's see. It would depend on probably what kind of cording you're going to hang it on, right?
Exactly, exactly. You can decide how big of a piece you want. But there's great ways to finish this off. As you can see here, I've put even little crystals on those. And
yeah, those look good.
Yeah.
And the one with the crystal over there, you added a large hole bead too. I like that technique.
Yeah.
Adds a little more flair.
Yeah, it does.
Let's
it
take
does.
a look. Let's take one more look at this one here too, because you have the riveting here.
Well, and that's where I did the top. As you can see in the center, I did a brad. Now, if you'll notice this kohl connection, these are actually taking thin pieces of wire where I burnt a little ball on the end of the wire, and I used a stitching technique. So that little ball ends up looking like a rivet, but it's much like a knot, more like a fiber stitch.
And what about the color on the outside piece?
That with the blue, that is just the color pencil again.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, that's the color. Both of those, all of these are color pencil. So, and I've got one on this side too, and this one here is nice because you can see how nice it is to add the other metals in, the silver and the copper.
Yeah, now when you're doing the colored pencil, does it matter what type of metal that you use?
No, but I would rather use copper.
Because you're going to cover it up anyway, right?
Right, I don't use any, I would not use silver just because you are going to cover it up.
Right.
So that would make me a little bit more nervous. And the other thing you can always do is come in with just heat patinas too.
Oh, and that looks so pretty.
You know, adding a little bit more to it.
Yeah, there are so many different ways to add color. I had no idea. Thank you so much,
And
Mary.
easy too.
That's right, it is.